So we are live now. Just a minute, let me check if everything is fine from YouTube. Okay, and we have Gugan as well with us. Hey, Gugan.
Hello. Hi, Uday. Hi, Nishu.
Hi, Gugan.
Hello.
How are you?
Okay, so we will wait for a couple seconds so that others will join. So right now we have like 30 audience joined so far. And do you hear echo of my voice?
No.
Okay,
Nope.
I'm hearing. Okay. Okay, all set. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Angular Online Meetup group. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, like wherever you joined from. And hope that fits appropriately. And I'm kind of hearing echo. Let me see what's going on.
It would be better that you close the YouTube stream because that's why you're hearing the echo. You can see the live comment.
Okay, okay, got it. I just muted it.
Yeah.
Yeah, now I'm not hearing it. Okay. And yeah, so we have awesome speakers here. And so I just want to thank them before we pitch into the talks. And why this group was started. So I just started this group a month back, and we have this Angular group everywhere, right? In every city in the world, but we don't have a connecting point where we can connect all the awesome speakers and anyone from any part of the world. So that's why I started this group, and this is going to be online group, and it's going to be online forever. So like if you like any audience who want to present something on this forum, you can just reach out to me. And you can also take this group to your friends and colleagues who want to join our future events, right? So that's why I started this group. And I also host another group here in United States. That's kind of a face-to-face meetup group. That's a quick introduction about this group. Let's go on to speakers. I just want to thank once again for taking your time, Nishu and Gugan, and going to share your knowledge with us. And I just want you guys to introduce yourself. So let's go ahead with Nishu first.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today and see so many people. Everybody is typing, everybody is live in the comments. Thank you, everyone. And I think you all know, that I'm going to talk about Angular routing today. This is my favorite topic. So that's what we're going to do. Thank you.
Yeah. And to add on top of that, those who don't know, like Nishu is a Google developer expert, like first Google developer expert for Angular from India. And she also wrote a book on Angular router, and it's available on Amazon. So that's what I know about Nishu, other than her as a speaker. And let's move on to Gugan. Gugan,
Hello,
can you quickly introduce yourself?
hello everyone. I'm Gugan Armugam. I'm a senior front-end developer at Tata Consultancy Services. At the free time, I write some articles and blog about Angular a lot. So, I'm an NGRX lover actually. I love NGRX store code. So, I just contribute on that part. So, yeah, that's it from my side.
Okay, thanks, Gugan. Okay, so here is the schedule we have. But before we talk about schedule, I just want to introduce myself as well. So I'm the host of this event, and I organize Angular events on Angular Online Meetup group as well as on Angular Rally Meetup group. And I'm Uday. I go by the name Uday, and I work for a company here in United States, and I have close to 11 years of experience on multiple platforms in software development. And I like teaching basically. That's how I started in the beginning. I worked for NIT for 3 months, and then I worked in an engineering college for an year, and then I moved to IT. So that's why I still have a passion for teaching. So that's a quick introduction about me. And let's quickly go through the schedule for today. So we begin with the welcome session. Yeah, that's what we are on to now, like 5 to 5:10, and all this time go on IST, right? And from 5:10 to 6:10, Nishu is going to share her knowledge on Angular router with us. It's going to be it's going to be 1 hour event, and we will have the question and answer session at the end. And in between, Nishu may ask some questions to participants, and you can just answer through live chat. And once after that, we will have a icebreaker session. It's kind of a quick, fun quiz, kind of, I would say. It's not going to be something on Angular or JavaScript. So we'll have a fun quiz. That's where we'll get introduce ourselves more. And then we will move on to the second talk of this event, which is Angular best practices and more by Gugan. And we'll end this session with closing notes if you have any. Like if you want to share something about this event, or if I want to share something about this event, I will do that from 6:50 to 7. And that's what the schedule for today, right? So let's move on to the first talk of the event, a deep dive into router. Over to you, Nishu.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make sure if I'm audible well, because I saw many people complaining that I'm not audible.
Yeah, it's audible for me, but I see some interruptions here and there. Can you make sure your
Let me just stop
microphone is...
Yeah, let me just stop my camera. Maybe that makes that.
Okay.
I'll start by sharing my screen.
Okay, that may work out. Yeah. In between audience, before Nishu joins back, just introduce yourself. Just to say hi, your name and the place where you joined from, like your city and the country. So that will help us to know like where you are joined from, and you can introduce yourself from others as well. Okay, just your name and the place where you joined from. Say, for example, if you are joining from Chennai, you can say, I am XYZ joining from Chennai, India.
So is my screen visible?
Yes, Nishu, but your camera is not working now.
Yeah.
Yes, it's perfect now.
Great. Okay, so once again, hi everyone. We're going to talk about the Angular router today. And those of you who are very new to Angular, I'll still try to cover the basics. And after that, we'll dive deeper into the Angular concept, the route concept mainly. So those of you who don't know me, a little bit of my introduction. I work as an engineer at IBM. I'm also recognized as a Google developer expert. I usually write blogs around the Angular concepts and around web components, Polymer, or Angular components here at my blog. And you can find my code, POCs, and everything on this GitHub username, Nishu. So that's about me. If you want to connect with me on Twitter, right at the bottom of the screen is my Twitter username. So the agenda, the session of today looks mostly like this. We're going to start off with discussing what is Angular router. We'll see the Angular router life cycle, meaning how does the Angular start, where is it instantiated, then what happens in the life cycle process of it. We'll finally go to the lazy loading of different routes and see the different updates in the latest versions. Latest means version 7, 8, and 9. These are the different versions that we'll see the router changes in, the router updates in. So moving on, first of all about the Angular router. So if anybody doesn't know what Angular router is, it's the official library for routing in your Angular-based web applications. And it comes as a package with Angular in the mono repo of Angular, which is called Angular router. The package name is called Angular router. And what it basically does is navigates to the configured routes for components which are routable. Now we have different types of components in an Angular application. You can have nested components. You can have components which do not have any relation to each other. For example, there's no communication through the nesting of components or maybe through services. And that's where, routable components also come into picture. So if you want to navigate to the configured routes, these are the configured router states in your routing module that you specify, and Angular router package helps you with that. That's one thing that it allows you to do. And the steps in the process are, first of all, you need to import the router module. When you have done that, you want to configure the router states. The router states are mainly the path configuration, where you want to give that at this particular path, you want to load this particular component. We'll discuss each of these one by one. And finally, it helps you navigate from one view to another view. And to discuss all of this, we'll go back a little bit and try to traditionally understand the concept of web applications. So first of all, we'll import the router module. It looks something like this. We will import routes and router module from the package called Angular router. And in the imports array of our app module, we'll specify the router module which is coming from your Angular router package, and .for root. Now, I will have a question to you related to for root, router module for root. So just stay attentive, because that question is going to come soon. A tip here is that we always create a separate routing module, right? Whenever CLI prompts you asking that, do you want to add Angular routing to your Angular application? And if you say yes, it actually adds a separate module for you, which is the routing module, from which you need to export the router module array in the exports array, router module from the exports array, so that it's accessible to your whole application. And that's where my question comes in, and you can feel free to answer that in the chat section. And that is that what would happen if we don't use the for root method in the router module? What if we just write router module just like another feature modules that we use in Angular? So that's one question. I will wait for like some time and then answer this question myself. So in the chat section, you can feel free to answer that. The second step in the process is to configure the router states. Now, this is a terminology. You need to understand what router states are. So it's basically the configuration of the different paths and components that you give. And the router understands that, okay, if this particular path is coming in, that's where you have to go. This is the component where the application gets redirected to. So these are the few routes that are here for example. And the order of routes is very important. We'll again come to that discussion, how the order of routes matter here. So one important thing here is that we should not place the wildcard route. I'll talk about wildcard route. We should not place that before any other route, because the router states have to be in the order and they are checked in the order of their configuration. For example, if you put this wildcard component, which can be a page not found component, for example, or an error page component, and if you place that at the first of your routing configuration, what would happen? It would always get selected and all the routes will go to your wildcard component, and that's not something that you want. You want that your router should check all the different configurations, all the router states, and when it cannot find any of those, that's when it should go to the wildcard component, which is the page not found or whatever configuration that you've given there. That's about configuring the router states. And finally, you should be able to navigate, right? So to navigate, if you want to route from the template, we all know that there's this router link directive, and therein you can specify whatever path you want to go to. For example, if the person is clicking on this profile path, profile button, for example, he will get routed to /profile, and in your router config, router states that you have given, when the person comes on profile, he should be routed to the profile component. This is the very basics of your routing, how routing works in Angular. But there are scenarios when you want to do something before you're actually routing. So for example, the person clicks on profile, but he wants to change some color or do some navigation, maybe, toggle one type of a show to show something. That's when you would want to route from the code instead of directly routing from the template. And that's when you can do routing from the code by injecting the router dependency and simply using the navigate method and specifying the array of routes, whichever routes you want to navigate to. So this is something very basic about navigation. Three steps in the process. One is you need to import the router module, very important. I still have the question that why do we need to use for root to in the router module, and what does it help us with? We should export the router module in the exports array. We need to configure the router states. We need to make sure we should be very sure of the order that we are giving to our router configuration, router states. And we need to make sure that we don't place the wildcard component, wildcard route at the first, because we want to make sure that all the routes are accessible. And we finally navigate from the template or from the code. Now, what is router outlet? This is where the importance of understanding what SPAs are comes into the picture. So let's go back and try to understand it traditionally. So before we had single page applications, we could imagine, or even before that, much before, we could imagine a web application, something like a combination of multiple pages where one page links you to the other page and to other page, and that's how your navigation used to work, right? It could be either in the same browser window or in a different window. However, with single page applications, what it really means is that you have just one single page, and you can specify everything there. You would have your whole website in that single page, your whole web app in that single page. But does that mean you place everything on that single page? No, right? If you're developing a e-commerce application, for example, you would not want your product listing and the cart to be on the same page. What do you do in that case? You want that there should be a placeholder for you, and that placeholder puts in different things dynamically. Whichever component, for example, you want right now should be placed here, and after that, some other component should come in. And that placeholder is helped, it comes into picture when we use router outlet. So we need to specify router outlet wherever we want to use the component. So if this is one single page for you, the slide screen that you see, this is a single page, and you want to show everything here, but make sure that you don't have you have different views which are coming into the picture. That's when you would use router outlet. So if you're routing to one view, that view renders in this particular place where you have defined your router outlet. And if you navigate to some other view, that view comes into the picture then. And you can think of it something like you have a header section, you have a footer section, and in between the body section is something where you want to change the routes. And for the changing of routes, you have this router outlet placeholder. It exactly works as a placeholder. And then your routing configuration defines that which path is configured, which path is told to the router configuration to load the component. And you might always, have faced or will face this problem that you do everything related to routing, but then you don't see the route change. That is because you need to place your router outlet exactly where you need to configure your render your component. That's about router outlet. And before going to the for root answer slide, I would ask you if there are any questions. I'll just check in the stream if there are any questions related to for root. Correct. So I see many right answers. So just to specify, just to clarify this answer to everyone, we use for root because we need to create one instance of the router module. And if we don't have for root specified there, every feature module will create a new router instance, and that would break the application, because one Angular application can have one router instance, right? One router in the whole application. So when we specify for root with our router module in the main root module, we make sure that all the other feature modules will use the for child method there. Will import for child, and that's how your configuration works. And if you look closely into how for root method works, it actually returns a module with provider's object, which takes in two things, ng module and the provider. This makes sure that you're creating one instance of whatever thing you are following for root with. For example, in this case, you are making one instance of your router module. So that's about using for root. It's not here. Yeah. So now we'll go to Stackblitz and try out this basic routing navigation. What we really care about here is the routing configuration that we have done. And I'll show you how the route order matters a lot in the routing configuration. So app routing module is where we have placed the configuration for our routes. And this is one, this is another. We have a redirect route. So I would like some of you to answer why we have a redirect path at all in the routing configuration. And let me just show you what happens if we place this wildcard component as the first route in the routing configuration. And let me try to access the hello path now. I expect that when I go to the hello path, I should be able to render the hello component, right? But that's not, apparently that's not how our routing configuration works. It would not be able to find this at all. It would say that no such route available, because the first route that it can see in the configuration is that the page cannot be found. And your page not found component actually contains this view, which says no such route available. So the order of routes actually matters a lot. We place it in the end to always make sure that when no path is found, only then our page not component should be rendered. And now, for example, we have hello, we have main page, and we specify some new route path. This won't be recognized at all. It would check all the routes, all the paths, and when it can't find any of those, it would directly go to the wildcard route. This is known as wildcard route because it doesn't exist in the configuration. So that's about your basic navigation. You know now that why we have for root here. We also know that you can create a error page, something like this. In our case, it's a page not found component, which just says that no route available. In real-time applications, we have dedicated error pages to fall back to when the application cannot find anything. And you also might have faced problems related to production servers. So when we deploy our Angular application to production, and when we try to access any path, any route, we are not able to access those. So for that, there are two ways. This depends on the location strategy, actually. There are two ways to do it. Either you can use hash-based location strategy, which basically means that you would just specify use hash as true in your routing configuration. And this would add a hash to your URL, as you see here. But this makes sure that then all your routes are configured in the server, and the server understands, the browser understands that after hash, whatever comes is to be the route, and all the routes will be loaded in once your index.html is rendered. The other routing strategy, let's go back to my slides. Yeah. So we have discussed this, the order, we have seen this, wildcard route we know now. Coming to location strategy, which I was talking about, if you're using hash-based location strategy, we see a URL, something like this, and the behind the hood, this is what Angular does. So if you're specifying a location strategy, it checks for this, that if there's a hash included, if you use a hash as true, it would make sure that hash-based location strategy is used. Otherwise, you have path-based path location strategy. And now this function is very important. This other method that you see here, prepare external URL. This is mainly responsible for telling the browser URL that this is the path to be rendered into the browser. We'll look into more of this a bit later. But remember, prepare external URL does the trick for us from the Angular code. Now, let's go ahead and try to understand the router lifecycle. So this is the main process that the router goes through when it's trying to render your component on the initialization of a new route. So the first thing it checks for, this is basically in your router states, it checks for any redirects if there are available. So for example, in the application we just saw, we had this redirect available for our main page. So if it would check that first, if it is there, it would directly jump to the redirect path, go there, and then it would check URL as per the route path. So it would specify in the URL that this is the specified path, and just populate the URL, browser URL, as that particular path. That's the second step in the process. But then would it just navigate because the browser has the URL now? There is one more step in between wherein the browser needs to check that is there any guard or resolver which is applied on this particular route, or can I simply go ahead and activate the view for you in the browser, render the component into the browser. So the third step is very important, which is to check if the guards and resolvers are processed or not, if they are applied at all or not. And finally, it can activate the view using router outlet. That's where again router outlet comes into picture, because to activate the view, it needs to know where to activate it. And that where means that placeholder which we were talking about, that placeholder is router outlet. And the same process is repeated every time. First thing, it would redirect if there is any redirect in the router state. Then it would go to the URL as per the router configuration, populate that in the browser. Then it would check for any guards or resolvers that are available. We'll talk more about guards and resolvers. And finally activate the view using the router outlet. So there are times when we want to actually see that in our application, when exactly is which router event getting called. And to check that, we can observe the router life cycle using this router instance. You can inject this as a dependency and use this to subscribe to all the events of your router event and log them to the console or wherever you want to use them. And if you want to debug using that, if you want to actually see how and at which particular point is which router event getting called, you can just set this key enable tracing as true, which will help you observe this life cycle closely and debug to see that when this particular path was called, which router event was invoked, for example. So this is again very important. Enable tracing helps us a lot. I mean, I have debugged a lot of my applications using enable tracing, and make sure that the routing is working exactly as it should. And these are some of the router events. I'll actually go to the code because here it's like very gibberish, very clumsy. So let's not have a look at it here. So let's go to Stacklets again. This is another demo that we have for our router events. So I see in between that there's a question called which location strategy is best to use, path location strategy or hash based. So it actually totally depends on the configuration. If you don't want to hash in your browser URL, that if that's the client requirement, and even then you want to load different routes, you can specify this configuration at your server end and make sure that all the routes are understood by the browser when you load your index.html. So you can do that too. So here, let's look at how I have configured that in our app routing module. So first thing, in our for route method, we are using enable tracing as true to make sure that we are able to see the different router events and debug those. And the other thing that you need to do is in your app component, not in your app component. Yeah, in your hello component, you can simply use this router instance and subscribe to the events of the router event and log them to the console. Now let's have a look at those. I'll open this in a new window to make sure that we understand. We can see the events properly. And now if you look at it, the first event which was called in the router lifecycle is navigation start. It tries to start the navigation with an empty URL because it was a redirect path. That's why it is redirecting. Once that is done, like you can dive deeper into this, why navigation trigger is imperative, why restored state is null. Once that is started, once your navigation is started, the next thing it needs to check is the route recognized? What does that mean? Can the router find such a route in the routing state, routing configuration, route states? So if it can find main page, for example, it will pass true for your router routes recognized. If your routes are recognized, the next step for it should be to check the guards. Before that, if it doesn't check the route, what happens then? It simply falls back to the wildcard route, right? So routes are not recognized, it will go to the wildcard route. When that is done, when your routes are recognized, it would next go to your guards check because it wants to now process the guards and resolvers. So in the guards, it basically checks few things. It would check the router state, which contains the URL you're trying to route to, and the permissions if you've specified any. And if you look at this root node, for example, if the route has any children, that will come here in here. And all the permissions also come here if you've specified that. Since we don't have the permission specified, we can't see anything here. If it fails, again, if your guards check start fails, what happens then? It passes a navigation cancel property back. I mean, navigation cancel becomes true, and that's when you can use any error handling to say that if the user is, for example, not an authorized user, then he should fall back to the home page or the dashboard page or whatever. So that's the navigation cancel event. When that is done, it would check for the children component. If there are any, it would activate them. Similarly, the activation for start will start for them, and the guards check will end because the activation could start because the guards were checked properly. Resolve start, resolve end is basically when your guards are checked, when you've seen that you can activate that particular route, you'll finally go to resolve. We'll talk more about resolvers a bit later, but for now, just to understand, it basically means loading all of your data, the static data and the dynamic data together. You might have seen, right? There's partial loading of your page when you're getting some data through an asynchronous call. So to handle that, we have resolvers. We'll look more into that. Finally, when it has checked for resolvers also, the activation ends, and the child activation also ends if there is any, and it opens the particular path in your browser, and that's when the navigation ends as well. And this is where that method that I was talking about, prepare external URL, is called, because this is where the router tells the browser that this is the perfect URL you need to route to, and prepare external URL method will be called with that particular URL, and it will be populated in the browser. Hope I'm making this clear to you. Scroll is mainly about if you're scrolling, and then let me just show this to you.
Nishu, sorry to interrupt you. You are able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you please zoom your screen a little bit? That's what audience are saying. Looks like they are not able to see now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so that was about the router events. Apparently I can't zoom this one, but yeah, we can zoom the slides. Now we'll talk about these events one by one. We discussed that first event is navigation start. Once you start the navigation, it needs to check the routes if they are available in that particular router state that you've defined in your app routing module. Now, either it would check the URL that is specified, or it will simply redirect if there's no first URL that you're giving. For example, you're just going to localhost 4200, but then there's a redirect path. Then it would check that redirect path, give you the redirected URL, basically give the router the redirected URL, and populate that in the browser. And we have seen that it looks something like this. This is mainly because I kept it for if the internet doesn't work or stagnates, ditches me at the end. And finally, once your routes are recognized, you think that if the route is recognized and the browser now knows of the URL, it should be able to navigate, right? But that's not the case. It should check for your routes, right? I mean, router guards. So it checks for different guards. These are the 4 different invocations that happen. It needs to start the guards check start, and the child activation if there is any. When the guards check ends, that's when your resolvers come into picture. And like I said, if the guard fails, the router would emit an event called navigation cancel. And this simply gives back that the user is not authorized to access this view, for example. And then, whatever your application demands, you can accordingly set that up there. And just to have a look at the different guards that are available to us before moving to the next router event, this is the order of the execution of guards. Again, this is very important. These are the different types of guards that we have for our routes. One is can deactivate, then we have can load, can activate child, can activate, and resolve. So basically, resolve is actually also a type of guard, though we consider it as a route resolver, and we think that it's not a guard, but it is a guard. And this is the order. I'll justify why this is the order of our router guards. First of all, can deactivate is invoked because we want to check that if a particular user can go back from this particular view. For example, you might have seen something like when you're trying to navigate back to a view, you might you usually get this pop-up, right, saying that are you sure you want to navigate back from this page? Yes or no specifies, gives back you the response. So this is what this is one example of what can deactivate allows you to do. Then you have can load. Can load guard comes into picture when you're doing lazy loading of components of your modules, feature modules. So when there's a feature module and you want to specify that this should be loaded at this particular time when the user is trying to do this, that's when this can load guard comes into picture, and it will see that only if the user is, for example, authorized to load this particular view, then only load that module. Otherwise, just don't load it. That's not required. It's very performance friendly, right? So let's take an example here. For example, you're using Amazon and you're not a Prime user, but then let's just visualize that Prime.com was within the Amazon website. It was something called amazon.com/prime, for example. And when you want to go to the /prime route, it should basically load the feature module, which is the Prime functionality. But then before that, it actually wants to check if you are a Prime user at all. Otherwise, there's no point loading the Prime functionality also, right? No point loading the Prime main page also. That's when it would invoke the can load guard, check if you're a Prime user. If you are, then go to the /prime and activate that view. Otherwise, just don't do that. After that, you have can activate child. So if you have any child route components, that's when can activate child is invoked. Can activate when you want to make sure that is the user authorized to view this particular view. Can he go to this profile component, for example? Or can he go to the card component, for example? Does he need to be logged in to go to the card component first? Situations like that. And finally, resolve. Resolve is to get you all of your data when you are logged in or when on whatever condition. Now this is called in the end because you want to make sure that the user can activate a particular view, can load a particular feature module, and that is activated. Only after that you would want to resolve all the data. There's no point resolving the data before you can actually activate the view, right? So that's the reason resolve guard comes in the end. After that, so this is something, this is what your can activate guard looks like. As we saw in our router events also, it accesses a state which has this URL keyword, and that's where we specify the state, which is the router path. In the activated route snapshot, it makes sure that whatever route you're accessing, which you're trying to access, is specified there. And the observable basically accepts values like a promise of Boolean or a URL tree. There's very interesting thing around the URL tree that we'll check. And finally, what do we return from this can activate guard? You can return the current user who's trying to access a particular route, and then the ID, for example, to communicate between your different two components, wherein route parameters come into picture. So you can send a specific unique ID, for example, and that will allow you to fetch all the data from the route and access it inside your component. And if you want to create a guard using the CLI, this is the command for that, ng generate guard, and whatever guard name you want to use. Guards work similar to services, so they would also have the decorator @injectable, similar to services, no difference. It's just that in this case, it would be called a guard. And like I said, it always runs before fetching the data because there's no point loading the data if the activation even is not allowed, if the activation has not happened. Coming to route resolvers. Now, I've tried to explain in the best way possible using this diagram. So for example, you click on a component, you want to initialize, you want to render that, and that's when you see a partially loaded view of the static data you've put in. For example, you have a footer, which is the static content. And for the rest of your page, you have this asynchronous request that's happening. So you see the footer first, and in the time when the rest of the data is coming from the server, you can see just the footer. And after that, you get to see the fully loaded view in a few seconds. And now that's not a very good experience for the user, right? Which is why we can actually use route resolvers. What that helps you with is that it would prefetch the component data during routing and only show you the whole data, even show you the static data when your prefetching has happened. So this is something what it looks like. You click on the component, the resolver service is invoked. You get the data from the server, load the full component, and then only show the fully loaded view. There's no static data that you see before loading the dynamic data. But there's a catch. So this would actually result in the whole component coming in a few seconds. Again, that's not very user-friendly, right? Which is why in real-time applications, we use things like loaders or spinners to make sure that whenever the data is coming, in that, in those minutes, in those seconds, actually, you can show that loader, making sure that, basically showing that this is the time when your application is fetching the data, and you finally get to see the whole view. So this is why many real-time applications, enterprise-level applications, don't really use resolvers, and instead, they just show a loader or a spinner. And when you process the guards and routes, resolvers, which we were doing until here, we have processed the guards and checked for the route resolvers as well. After that, you want to go to the activation, and that's when your activation start event is invoked in your router lifecycle. Activation end. Before that, actually, the child activation also starts, and the child activation end invokes in the end after the activation end event. And like I was talking about this prepare external URL method, in the navigation end event that is invoked, you want to update the URL in the browser. And this is the piece of code that does it for you. So you want to update the target URL into the browser. For that, your location strategy has to make sure. This is the same location strategy instance that we use for our path location strategy or the hash-based location strategy. So this would invoke the prepare external method, and it would give you the URL in a serialized form, because this is what you want to specify to the browser, and the browser takes it as a URL, populates it there, and finally renders your view. All of this happens in the navigation end event that is invoked by a router lifecycle. So this is very important. Finally, lazy loading. This is again a very important concept of routing, and the credits for this image that I've used here, this picture that I've used here, would go to Srashti Jain. I'm not sure how many of you know her. She's a Angular expert, just like all of us. And she used this image, which is very creative, I found, and I asked her to use this in my slides. So there we go. And lazy loading basically means that you want to load a particular feature module for routing only when it's required. You don't want to load it within the whole bundle of yours, the rest of the bundle that you have, the main bundle. You don't want to load it with that, but load it only when it's required. And I think the prime example that I gave you some time back would be the best to explain this process as well, this lazy loading concept as well. So just like that, for example, you have this prime functionality in your application, and you don't want to use that. I mean, you don't want to load that when the user is just, browsing through Amazon.com, for example. And you want to load that only when the user seems to be interested to view the Amazon.com/prime also. This is an example. I mean, I know there's primevideo.com, but for example, you have a route called /prime. That's when you would want to load this particular module as well. And that happens on the request of a route. That route is /prime in this case. So this is what the situation looks like. The browser sends a request to the server sends back your index.html. The index.html, which has your full app component, the app root that needs to be loaded, at some time it basically requests for the next bundle, which is to load the files, and the lazy loaded files then come into the picture only on the requirement of those. Now you might be wondering that what if the loading of that particular bundle takes time when I require it. For example, you're trying to go to Amazon.com/prime, the loading might take at that time also, right? That again is not very user friendly, which is when preloading strategies come into picture. We can actually preload routes. We'll look into that. Before that, when you're lazy loading, there's a guard that comes into picture, right? I told you, can load guard. This makes sure that lazy loading should happen only if the user is authorized to load that particular view. And this is the new syntax of this came with Angular 8. And this syntax basically helps you load the particular feature module whenever you're trying to access a URL. So for example, in this case, you're trying to go to the /user path, and you don't have the component ready for that. You want to still load the feature module for that. That's when load children property comes into picture. And this is like dynamic import of your module. And this makes sure that, earlier we used to use a string here before Angular 8. And if we did any typo in there, we could not recognize it just when you're actually compiling your application. And which is why we have our dynamic imports here. You'll simply import, and whatever typo you do here, you'll understand what is the problem. So you'll import the module. There's destructuring we have used here. And in the can load guard, you'll load that particular module only if it can be loaded. It would check the criteria before loading that. Now, you can read more about preloading strategies on this URL, but just to give you a gist of what those are, there are 3 basically. If you want to preload no modules, if you're sure that your application doesn't need preloading at all, when you want to lazy load a particular feature module, you'll just load it right there. You don't need any preloading. You don't want to, do some eager lazy loading or something. This is also known as eager lazy loading, which means you're just too eager to, load your feature module. I'm just going literally here. So that's when eager lazy loading comes into picture. That's one. No preload modules, preload no modules. If you want to preload all the lazy loaded modules, that's when you use preload all modules. That's another preloading strategy. And for example, you have some modules which you want to actually preload, but there are some that you don't want to preload. That's when you have this custom preloading strategy, wherein you can specify that this is a particular feature module that you want to preload, but this is the one that you don't want. That's when custom preloading strategy comes into picture. So that's again very interesting. You should go ahead and read more about preloading strategies here. Then we know why we use lazy loading: to improve the performance and reduce the bundle size. And if you look at it, this is the regular bundle size that is without lazy loading. And if you perform lazy loading, you would see that there's another bundle. This is the publish module that you see here. This is a feature module that we have lazy loaded, and the size becomes very small. This was a small application, so there's not an immense difference in the bundle size, but for large applications, you can actually see a great difference, reduced bundle size. This is without lazy loading. You have the main.js bundle as 151 KB. This is with lazy loading, where your bundle size has reduced to 142 KBs, but then your feature module has another 9 KBs, which is loaded only when it was required, when we went to the publish route. And if you want to check that, I'll simply open it quickly. So yeah, this is the stackblitz example that I've added here. Let me just quickly paste this in the chat section so that all of you can try along with me and see the bundle size difference here. So please check it in the chat section. And if you see here, the way we are doing lazy loading is like this. So you've given a path and you want that on the request for this particular path, you want to import this module, and that should be lazy loaded, right? So let's go to the console or simply open it in a new window. That's better. I'll go to the network tab to see if the request is happening. So now when I want to go to the hello route, I expect that there should be another loading of our feature module. And if you see here, we have this another fetch for this particular module. And this would generate another bundle for you, which is for your hello component, which we have lazy loaded here. So lazy loading really helps us with reducing the bundle size. Moving on, we'll quickly talk about all the updates in the router from version 7 of Angular, version 8, and version 9. And this is the blog that I've written about these specific updates in the router. So you can go to this particular URL and read more about all the different updates. I'll go through these one by one. So let's talk about the version 7 differences, updates first. So earlier, there is this method called run guards and resolvers. And it accepts a certain value, which makes sure that the guard and resolver should run only when this particular value change has happened. So there was a new path addition, which is called path params change. This would ignore all the metrics parameters that change or any value query parameters which are changing. It would make sure that only if the path is changing in the URL, in the browser URL, or the path param is changing, which means, for example, the ID in the route. If only those two things are changing, then only check for your guards and resolvers. Don't check for them if any query parameter, for example, is changing. Because, for example, if you have a search component, right, search bar component, and you might try many different keywords, and you don't want to check for the guards each and every time you're trying a different keyword, right? That's when you don't really want a query parameter check on your running of your guards and resolvers. So the path params change property does that for you. Then there was another change in the version 7, which was to return URL tree from your guard. This is also very interesting. So earlier, we could only pass either true or false from our guard, which would suggest that if the guard has failed, just pass on false. If the guard has succeeded, just pass on true. But now you can also pass a URL tree, which would serialize your URL and give a string of the URL that you want to specify if the guard has failed. which means that, for example, the guard has failed and you want the user to fall back to a home component. You can specify that home component here, and the router will actually return the home component then. Now, in the case when you're actually returning the router, you are returning the URL tree from your guard. In that case, multiple URL trees can be returned and multiple guards can run, right? How to avoid such a scenario? Because when your multiple guards are running, you don't know which guard to run first, right? Which a little after that. That's when the need of guard priority comes in. So to do that, you have this prioritized guard value that you see on the screen. This makes sure that whichever guard has the first priority gets executed first. This is very important when you're dealing with URL tree, when you're passing URL tree in your guards, because otherwise you'll have multiple guards and your application, you might not be able to go anywhere with your routing config. That was about version 7, the changes that happened. About version 8, the major change was the change in the syntax of our import of lazy loaded routes. Earlier, we used to specify something like this, load children, and it was a string property. It would accept a string here, like this, user module and hash user module. But now we have dynamic import here. We can use the import statement to actually import our user module. There are actually some problems with it, like destructuring. It doesn't accept, it only accepts like M mod and those things. It doesn't accept every different value that you can give in. So, but that's not very important. And then there's this other update, which was to add hash-based navigation option to our setup location sync method. This is not very important. This is basically about upgrading Angular application. So when you're upgrading your Angular application, that's when you want to make sure if it's a hash-based navigation or what. And that is something that you can specify by passing the hash property equal to the path. That's only when you're upgrading your application. And finally, in version 9, there was not much change in the router except for this one. So earlier, router link active used to work with query parameters which do not have an array in there. Like for example, if you're passing a property with your router link active, it would accept the param property as 1 or as a string, but it won't accept an array there. So the code change was this particular thing. Now it accepts an array also. So that was about version 9. And like I said, you can read more and in detail about all these updates in the router, which would really help you, have a better control over routing in your application. And yeah, this is where you can read it, this particular URL. Let me just now right away, let me paste this in the chat section as well. Yeah, so that's about the updates in the router. And I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'll talk about some of the resources that you can follow to, dive deeper into routing mainly. Changelog is the one thing that you always should refer to whenever you want to know the new updates in detail in the router or any other package or just Angular specifically. Angular documentation would help you understand at least what is behind the hood, which is the code for a particular thing, and how it is redirecting to you to a particular URL or a routing config. Then there's this very interesting routing series by this author Nate, and it talks about different pillars of routing, which is very interesting to read about. You can go ahead and read that. And this book also, Step-by-Step Angular Routing, it's by me, so I don't want to talk much about it. But yeah, you can go ahead and read this also. It talks about all the different routing concepts, covering routing parameters, query parameters, optional parameters, all the different types of route resolvers or route guards. So yeah, if you want to dive deeper into router, you can refer to this book. It also has a Angular repository attached with it, which gives you all the different examples of how to implement routing in your application, covering from route guards to route resolvers to everything. That repository is present on my GitHub, so it's called Angular Routing Book if you're interested in. And yeah, that's it. Thank you everyone for joining today. You can connect with me on these portals and read blogs around the concepts of Angular mainly at this particular blog. And again, yeah, thank you everyone. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Hey, Nishu, you're able to hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
I was muted. Okay. Yeah, I will just post the questions on the screen, whatever we got from audience. Okay, you can just go through it and answer them. So this is kind of a true or false question, I guess. The first one.
Where is that? The one
It's
which
on
is
the,
on the screen?
yeah, which is on the screen. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So this is basically an answer that Vishal was giving when I asked him the question that why do we use for root? So if we don't add for root in routing configuration, we'll have a separate instance of the router in every other module, which is not something we want because that would break our application. And the router should have just one instance across throughout your application. So thank you, Vishal.
Okay, so let's move on to the next one, which is from Pavan Kumar. Which is the best practice to use either custom local strategy or hash strategy?
Yeah, so I think I've answered this question before during my presentation. There's no best practice around it. It always depends on the requirement. So if for example, the client requirement is to not use hash in the URL, you can go ahead to the server, make the changes there for your routing config that it supports all the different routes when you are rendering index.html in the browser, and you don't need hash-based strategy at all then.
Okay. Yeah, move on to next one. This is from Dev Suhas. Can we share router instance from one module to another?
So I don't think I understand this question. Can we share router instance from one module to another? What does this mean?
Okay, I guess create one router configuration in one module and try to use that in the other as well.
But
Instead
why
of,
would you want to do that? I mean, there's no point that we would want to do something like that, right? If your app module has a router instance, and if you want to
it's going to
specify
be
the router,
commonly shared, right? Yes.
so there's no point using, sharing the instance. If Suhas can, explain better about what the requirement is, then maybe I can answer.
Yeah, Dev Suhas, if you are there, you can add the more questions to it. So Nishu can answer that. Yeah, and this is from Anil. We can lazy load by using view container ref and component factory resolver. Then why we need can load card?
So Anil, this is a very specific question to when we are using dynamic components. If you want to use dynamic component and particularly load that component, that's when view container ref and component factory resolver would come into picture. However, there are many scenarios when the application doesn't want to load a dynamic component at all. So that's when can load comes into picture. We don't want, I have worked in many applications which do not support dynamic components. When, for example, you're dealing with AEM, Adobe Experience Manager, it creates problem with that. So there are scenarios when you would want to use simply lazy loading the feature module instead of dynamically generating a component. I hope I cleared your question.
Okay. Yeah. So hope you are able to hear me now, everyone.
Yes.
Okay. How about audience? You are able to hear us, like both of us? Because I'm getting comments saying that we are not audible. Okay. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. How to load multiple comments. Let me load that on the screen. Yeah.
Yeah. What is it? How to load multiple components with different data, but they depend on same route. I'm asking about how to properly use named router outlets. Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question. So this is basically called secondary routes that we want to use in our application. Now, so for example, you have few router outlets, like this is one page of your application, and you want to specify 3 router outlets. How would you make sure that one router outlet understands this particular route, but then the other router outlet understands this particular route? So that's when we specify a name property, giving the name to the route, and the router outlet which will take the data from that particular route only. And if the question here is how do we okay, I think I've answered this question. Is there anything more that you want to ask here, Umesh? You can load multiple components with different data, which are depending on the same route. You just need to pass the name property, which would have a specific name related to the route that you want to load in that particular space of your secondary router outlet.
Okay. I think that's all we have, and a couple of appreciations you got so far. Let me put it on the screen. One we got from Martina. Where is that? I saw it. Yeah. Sorry, Marcus.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we got one more from Santosh. Great slides.
Thank you, Santosh.
Yeah, and any more questions, participants? Okay, we got one more question from Pawan.
Okay.
So this is a continuous question to Devsuga's question. So what if same route has different views? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. What if same route has different views which are hosted in different feature modules? Okay. I don't think I understood this question. What if same route has different views which are hosted in different feature modules? So,
Okay.
Pawan, talking about secondary route outlets again.
Yeah, I got the question here. Can I
Yeah.
elaborate that? Say you gave the example for Amazon Prime, right?
Yeah.
So if Amazon Prime is going to have 2 or 3 different views according to a specific locale, say for example, it needs to load the different modules, right?
Yeah.
So the route is going to be same /prime, but the view is going to be different, like a different component. So how that can be handled in Angular? That's what this question, I believe.
Okay, yeah. So that's exactly about secondary outlets, which somebody, I think Umesh also asked about that. So for example, you want 3 different routes on one route on a single view, and you have a different component for that, each one of the routes. That's when you use secondary router outlets. I mean, you can also call them named router outlets. Just specify this name property. For example, this name property is called user. This would load this user component in the right side of your application, the right screen of your application. But then you want, if the footer component, for example, also is a routable component, but in the same view, that's when you can specify the name of that particular router outlet as footer. And this would only load the footer component in that. If that's the question, I think I've answered that.
Okay. And that's it. Okay, so a couple of other appreciations for you.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you, Darpan. Thank you, Siddharth.
Yeah, and Siddharth. Thank you, Siddharth. Yeah, Darpan as well. Yeah. So any more questions, participants, before we move on to next item in today's event?
Or how about I just put in a few questions before you go to the non-technical round?
Go ahead, Nishu. Yeah, you can just post the questions in live comments.
Yeah, it's just for me to understand better that how many of you could understand from the slides today. So, okay, when do we use scan load guard is one question. You can answer that in the chat section.
Yeah, can you type the question, Nishu? I will put it on the screen.
Yeah, sure.
And thanks, DJ, for joining.
Thank you, DJ.
And Srashti as well. Yeah. Okay. So once you post the question, let me know, Nishu. I will.
I've done that, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I think you put it in the private chat.
Private chat, okay. Correct. Yeah.
Sure. So this is a question from Nishu. When does scan load guard come into picture? Okay, we got one more question, I guess. Okay, so Siddharth answered to check if a lazy module can be loaded or not.
Correct.
Okay. So this is a second question from Nishu. What is prioritized guard value comes into picture? Okay. She's firing with question.
The last one from my end.
Okay. That's fine. I think when we want to load important part of the component first. So this is the answer from Krishna for your second question.
Okay, when does the scenario come into picture? That why do we need to, consider the priority of guard at all? What would happen when you would have multiple guards coming into picture at the same time, and you would need to decide the priority of the guard? So that's when you're passing a URL tree from the guard, right? Earlier, we could only pass true or false when the guard was failing. Now you can also pass the URL tree. And that's when you are giving one route, the guard which the route has, you're giving that guard another route. So that's multiple routes coming into picture. And that's when you need to make sure of the priority. Thank you for your answer.
Yeah. And the third question from Nishu is here. When is navigation cancel event invoked? Okay, this is the answer from Vijay. It's in Tamil.
Yeah.
It's for, the answer is auth resolving.
Is that the answer to the second question? I think that's to the second question.
Okay. So yeah.
Yeah.
If any error occurred while process of routing, this is for third one, I guess.
Yeah. So if the guard fails, then that's when your navigation cancel is invoked, because then you don't want the user to actually navigate to the route. So you would cancel the navigation. Mm-hmm. That's all the questions that I had to ask. Thank you all. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Nishu, for taking your time and sharing your knowledge. And I shared your blog post and the slide, the Stack Overflow link, Stack Blitz link as well. If possible, can you ping me those links separately?
Maybe how about I share my slides and with everyone? It has all the links attached.
Which one?
The slides.
The slides. Okay. Okay. Then that's cool. Okay. Thank you so much, Nishu.
Thank you.
Yeah. Stay on the stream. We have a couple of other items coming up.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Let me share my screen. Okay. So how about Gugan? Gugan, are you still there? Connected?
Yes, I'm still. Yeah.
Okay.
That was a great talk, Nishu. It was a great talk. I really today I learned about order of the execution of the guards and the prioritized guard also. That was so cool. Thank you.
Yeah, even I tried child routes and primary routes. That's it. I didn't go beyond that. Maybe I'll try the other stuffs going forward.
Yes.
Okay. So coming up next is Gugan. Sorry, I cut you. You have anything to add?
No. Yeah.
Okay. So coming up is Icebreaker session. We can call it as Icebreaker. So this is just to get ourselves comfortable. This is going to be a quick fun quiz, and this is not going to relate. It is not going to be on Angular or JavaScript. So we are going to deal with some fun facts and other stuffs. And I'm not going to take much time there. So I planned for 10 minutes. Let's see whether we can complete it within that time. And last time, many participants complained that, there was a lag with the Kahoot quiz. That's why I kept the time as 60 seconds for each question. so that you, even if you face some lagging there, you can still answer the question, right? So let me share my screen. I think it's already shared. And let us play this quiz. Hope you are able to see my screen, right? Okay. So please join kahoot.it and enter the spin. Okay. I think Srashti wants to win quiz this time as well. So we'll begin the quiz once all the participants joined. And how many we have? Like 61. So I expect at least 50% of participation here. So don't worry, this is just a fun quiz. And we are not going to decide like who is the winner or who is the loser here. So I see 14 participants or 14 players so far. So how about others? So once I start the quiz, you cannot join. So please make sure you join before I start. And you don't need to give your name. Yeah, sanitizer is a good username. Yep. So anyone named Corona here? Okay, let's start the quiz exactly at 8:49. So any more participants going to join? Okay, we have Maddie, Deepak. Okay, Corona is there. Okay, welcome.
Uday, could you just remove the comment from the view? It's like blocking a part of the view.
Oh, sure, Nishu.
Yeah.
Yep, I did that. Okay, let's go ahead and start the quiz. So there are going to be 7 questions. So here is the first question. What does this emoji mean? Okay, we got 3 answers so far. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, this is going to be fun quiz. You can give any answers, but there is only one right answer here. I think all answered here. Okay, it's speak no evil. Right? Speak no evil is the answer. moving on to next question. Okay, Balaya is on top. That's good. So here is the next question. What occurs twice in a week, once in a year, but never in a day? Sorry, but never in a day. There's a typo in the question. So 14 answers, 15. 21. We have 26 participants. So 23 answers, 24, 25. Okay, it is the letter E, right? So the letter E occurs twice in a week and once in a year and never in a day. Okay, Srashti is on top. Great. So moving on to next question. Pick the open source OS from Apple. So this is not a joke. This is a real question. Apple has open source OS. What is that? So don't take help from Google. Okay. So we got 17 answers so far. 18. 20, 21. Oh, it looks like a horror music. Okay, it is Darwin, right? So Apple has its open source OS called Darwin. I'm not sure whether they are still maintaining it, but they had it before and even it's available now. So just in case if you want to give a try, check it out. So moving on to the next question. In Jungle Book movie, so which is a favorite movie, right? For all of us, mostly like 90s kids. What kind of animal is Balu? So I will give a clue here. It's a gigantic animal, so which can stand, which can walk, which can run. Yep, it's a bear. Bear is called, named as Balu in the movie Jungle Book. Okay, still Srashti is on the top. Good job, Srashti. And Angular 19 is on the second position, and Vijay is on the third position. Moving on to next question. How many months have 28 days? 1, 7, 12, 6. Okay, waiting for one more answer. So who is that not answering? Yep, it's 12. Okay. So like 50% answered it as 1, right? Everyone thought like February is having 28 days. No, every month has 28 days. Okay, that's fine. So moving on to the next question. What is blue smells like a red paint? So 21 answers. Waiting for 3 more players to answer. Okay, it is blue paint, right? So a blue smells like a red paint. Red paint and blue paint should smell like a paint, basically. And if it is going to be a blue, that's going to be a blue paint, obviously. So moving on to the last question. So this is a simple question. You can just decide whether it is true or false. Nomophobia, fear of losing mobile phone service. Like if we go to no network connectivity area, right? So we feel a little bit anxious. So is that called nomophobia? So is that one last person didn't answer yet? Okay, it is true. It is called nomophobia, which is a kind of phobia. So when you feel, when you lose network connectivity, you feel anxious, right? So that is called nomophobia. Thank you. So here is the podium. Let's see who is on the top. Okay, congratulations, Vijay. So you are in third position. Angular 10 is in third position, and number 1 is 8108 points, which is KK. Okay, and runner-up is Gopal and Suraj C. Thank you so much for attending the quiz. Hope it was interesting. Okay, let's move on to the next item in our agenda today, which is Angular best practices from Gugan. And I didn't introduce much. I didn't talk much about Gugan. Okay, Gugan is working for TCS, and he is a writer basically. So he has written a couple of articles for Medium as well as for Angular in depth, and also he is an amateur musician. That's what I heard from him. And over to you, Gugan. So all is yours.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I will share my screen. Just a minute.
Yeah, let me put it on the stream. So once you share the screen, let me know. So did you start the screen?
Yeah, just
So there is a button called start screen. Okay, yes, I see it now.
Okay, you are able to see this? Okay, fine, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we both will move from the stream.
Yeah, sure. Yes. So can you hear me? You guys can hear me, right? Am I audible? Oh, yeah, fine. Thank you. Sorry. Okay. So what I'm going to do, what I'm going to talk about today is like the best practices in Angular. Okay. So here I'm going to just talk about some few tips that would help you like build better enterprise applications. So as you know, like even in the previous like Angular Hive talk, we had Patov explaining or talking about Angular for enterprise. So Kyoto talked about lots of details like how it works, like what is necessary, what's important, what do you need to do, like how to organize your folders, those are talks things. So this time I'm going to talk about a few more best practices that you just when you start implementing in your application will help you to help the code maintain the code in a longer stretch. So the maintainability comes in, when maintainability comes to the picture for enterprise applications is always hard. So just these few best practices I have implemented in my enterprise applications, which was from scratch, and we had uh, a good, relatively good, like good enhancements have been done. Good maintenance has been like it was good, better. So I'm just gonna continue on that part. Okay. So the first tip would be like to provide configuration as a DI token. So you will have lots of configuration data in your applications. Let it be like your environment servers of the configurations, your REST endpoints, your asset URL configurations, your session timeout values, your mailer IDs. So there are lots of configuration data that comes for an applications. So this configuration data can be scoped into like two types. Okay, so one would be your application level, that is your entire thing that's been shared across the multiple modules. And if you're going to think about going for monorepo, then that would be like multiple apps also you can share those things. The other one would be like the module level, that is this particular data will be scoped to that particular module. So the purpose of like the splitting is like in Hanso, one main thing is all to increase the readability of the code. Like like okay, some in future when being in maintenance, like if you want to know like what does this particular module encapsulates, what this module configuration uses, what are the endpoints it uses. So you don't have to go on like to check by the code, go back and go to environment, then files, and then go back again and again. So for that purpose, I believe like splitting this could be helpful, and it was helpful. Yeah. So for application level, you normally place it in environment.ts file so that everyone can use that and include them in your application. For module data is what we are going to see today. Okay. So what the two steps would be like to declare a DI token globally, and the other one would be to put the configuration in your respective module and provide it to a DI as provided as the dependency inject into your respective components as services inside that module. So we're going to see like how to do that. Okay. So first step would be like to declare a DI globally. So dependency injection is like the best feature that has one of the best features for any Angular. So what we're going to do is we are going to use a feature called injection token, which will create a constant globally, so that no one kind of like an immutable string, kind of like you can assume that's an immutable string, which helps you to do also provides you like to dependency inject various values into it. So that is helpful. Okay. So this particular injection token will be kind of like will be set out globally. Like assume that for this in this example, I'm just creating it in app.config.ts or app.module.ts, so that globally it can be available, so that in a number of multiple modules, be it a lazy loader module or be it your isolate or be it your feature modules or sub feature modules, we can just segregate them. You can just use this particular token and just segregate them. So the next step after declaring the dependency injection the token would be that to dependency inject your configurations into your application. So for that purpose, I have created a module called layout module. So inside for this purpose, I'm just put everything in one particular class. So what I have done is like inside in the I have created a config provider. So this assumes this has this considers layout module to be something like it contains headers, it contains footers, it contains your the navigation styles that are required to be available global to application, but it has its own specific API calls or specific URLs to be used. Okay, so that's the thing. That's what we are going to see. That's what we have written over here. So this particular layout config provider has something called endpoints and accessories. So this particular configuration data, what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to provide it in my provide it to my configuration provider, to the configurations token. So what happens over here is we are using dependency injections use value property to provide this particular configuration data object into this particular injection token. So if we try to access this injection token in our components or services related to this particular module, we would get whatever config data we have provided it to at the module creation. So how we are going to do that is through the use of @inject function. That's what we are going to use that. So in any of a component construction, you can just provide it through @inject. So this is the syntax. You are passing whatever injection token you want to inject into this particular component. So at a runtime, so whatever value is being just passed into create instance creator for this will be injected into this particular constructor during this component's vector creation. So that gives much privilege to it. So the one more thing much why we tend to like this be helpful is because like we are scoping the configuration data. Since we are scoping the configuration data, we get to have like ownership, like this particular module contains this particular data. So we just don't have to get confused in the long run, like which one goes to which particular data. If your components going to need a shared instances, then you can just put them in your environment.ts and just you can invert in normal environment, normally injection of normal import of the environment. Then you can go continue with that part. Okay, so I hope you are this clear before going to the next one. So next best practice what I have tend to follow, like we have that much better thing would be like to use control value accesses for creating the reusable subforms. Okay. Forms are this biggest headache in any enterprise application. We have forms for orders, we have forms for submit check, we have orders for reviews, we have order for displaying the additional add-on stations, like if you want to add on any external after creating any order, new order or new purchase. Every forms are tedious, it's big, and we kind of like have lots of patches. We do tend to do like unit testing becomes a little bit hard when you have large forms. So and maintenance and error handling also becomes a little bit harder to do, validations and error handling. So I suppose that if we are able to create a form field groups that could be reusable, and subforms that could be like split into multiple curated forms into smaller forms, then we could, it is much more becomes easier for us to validate a form. The validator form for its form states such as pristine, and next would be like pristine, dirty, or touch, or valid. Those kind of realizations would be much easier to be handled. And along when it is easier to validate, then it obviously to be easier for us to handle the errors also. So much more it's easier for error handling purposes also. So we can just put them for each. We can have their own templates regarding that in that particular form. And our form, and as usual, the normal style rules of like we can even keep in check like number of lines of component, number of lines of code should be there for in a component. So that kind of style guide procedures are also is being used over here. So what all these three things would bring in is much more, the important one would be like linear unit testing. So you don't have to test your entire the big forms. You can just unit test all the smaller subforms and you can produce all the results, and it will be much more useful. So that's the thing. So I have also written a separate article about this control value accesses in a MediaMart. So I will share it at the end of the session. So the other one would, so just we'll see like a basics, like how we will create a control value access subforms. Okay. So first, for you have to create a basic info component. What you have to do is like you have to implement the control value access interface. Okay. So for now, understand like this control value access interface will have has 4 methods. Okay. So we have to override those methods for us to implement this reusable custom form controls. Okay. So here is a basic form component. It has 2 controls. One is like a full first name and another is email ID over here. So what happens is we are overriding 4 methods of the control value accesses, and they are write value, register on change, register on touch, and set disable state. So the important method for the custom form control would be your write value method. So this is where whatever values you set to your model will be set to your DOM, and whatever DOM value that is being set will be set to your model TS. So that's how it works. The next one will be register on change. If anything we would like to call a function, if any of our value changes, so that's the function that will be called when any of your values, any of the form control value changes. Okay, so next one will be like register on touch. So this function would normally like if you touch a form control, it means if your state goes to touch from pristine to touch, so this function would be called. The next one will be your disable state. So in this form is basically to set the disabled, whether the particular form control is being disabled or enabled. We normally use this form particular method for us to set the form disabled to move the form state from disabled state to a enable state and vice versa. Okay, so we spoke about creating a reusable form control. So now we have created a reusable custom form control. So the next step what we talked about is how it is easier to validate. So now I have encapsulated this particular form model into the particular form control. It has isolated it. So if I could just test only this particular 2 form controls validation alone, and I can project my errors, or I could project whatever values I have to show. And remember, even though this is isolated, its validation will be propagated to this parent component still. Parent route in the parent form component, form group, till that it will be propagated. You don't have to worry about that. But this helps us to validate this particular form's validation statuses, such as whether it's pristine or touch or dirty or invalid valid. So for that purpose, we have to implement a validator interface. Okay, so this validator interface has one method called as validate method, which we have to override that. So if you see over here, that's what we have taken into picture. So this validate takes an abstract form control. Here, this abstract control is nothing but one of your form controls over here, because form control inherently extends abstract control. So that's what. So this validate will give you either 2 things, either validation errors or nulls if any validation error occurs. So error handling is also being taken care of. We can just to minute level we can handle the error handling if we are able to like split up our forms into sub components. So it helps us. This is only if your form is huge and it's very large, not for the smaller forms. If the forms are very large, this is more efficient. If you go, or else if you go for smaller forms, if you try to use this kind of like feature, even though it's okay, but it might become bloated. So there's no reusable forms and there are no restrictions. There it becomes bloated also, because you have to create a separate files for this. So that's a con over that also. So you have to also know like for when to use this particular kind of implement trick and when not to. So that's also a thing. So the next one would be, next best practice would be like, okay, I'm sorry, I forgot to add. Okay, now we have created a custom form control and we have added the validation methods. So the next one would be to, you have to tell it to the Angular, like, okay, this is my control form custom form control. Now use it as a regular form control. Now don't tell it to the DOM that this is separate, just make the DOM act that this is also one of your native components. So how to do that? For that, we have to provide it to your ng value accessor. So if you see all these form controls behind the scenes, these form controls, these new form control classes, they also inherently occur the control panel and control value accesses for all them to occur. If you have gone seen your template model, this is part of reactive forms, and if you have gone through this normal forms like template driven forms, all your normal template forms are inherently accessing this control value accessor only. So they are also have the same concept of having the like validation separately and then having. So that's what we are trying to emulate over here. So we have to provide it to the ng value accessor, and then we have to provide it. We have to give multi-true because we can't have one single value. This is probably a dependency injection strategy to provide us multiple truths. That means this ng value accessor will have an array of values. That's what it basically means. So for this particular provide of ng value accessor token, you can have multiple values to it. And then once you have provided with this command, you are telling the Angular that, okay, yeah, this one is this basic info component is now a regular form control for the Angular. The next, for the validations to take place and validation strategies to take place, we provide it in ng validators. Again, we provide multi-true because ng validators can have multiple values to it and access multiple values to it. It can't be single value. Then with the default, because if you do single, then the defaults Angular's default multi-validators will not work. So this is the second best practice I have. Okay, I wanted to talk about. The next one would be use router as a single source of truth. This talk was great explained by Nishu in the previous talk. So I'm just going to just give a simple outlook on like why I'm saying this maintain router as a single source of truth is everything starts and ends at the router. You start from the router, your state change, your state data, the data to be loaded, the component to be showed, the view to be displayed, and the what particular data, what particular state has to be shown. So every form of control will in turn depend on what the router state is. So that's the reason why I'm saying if you use router as single source of truth, everything should start from the router. So when you're architecting any applications, the first thing what you have to decide would be like after developing what features you have to use, like how to map those features to the relevant routes, how you're going to create the routes, so that if you try to like map these relative features and functions to routes, then it will be much more easier for you to handle the state changes or state managing the state for the particular, and whatever if you want to like much more features comes in enhance. It's easier to like implement like much more without having to kind of like refactor code a lot, and this becomes much more useful because you are just single depending on this particular router single source, that everything starts from the router and ends at the router. So this is kind of like this particular quote is from Victor Sarkin. Okay, so he's kind of like he's one of the Narwhal's co-founder, and he's one of the guy who wrote the version 2 and 3 of the Angular router. So I think in one of his first blogs, this where he described that one, and it's kind of sketchy. So I just like tend to tell people that always this one. Whenever you before start architecting your router, you need to decide what kind of routes to be taken you have to place. So that's the thing. And I was talking about state management, right? So when I talk router, inherent state management also came in. Okay, so that's more important because state and the route, okay, they kind of like little bit not completely dependent. Like you have to know like for example, if we want to know like what kind of data to be loaded into when you are using that particular router, we can just manage them using that. That's the reason why we also have router states in NGRX, kind of like inherently for NGRX to use it. So here I'm talking about NGRX as the state management. We have lots of other libraries such as Akita and NGXS is also there. They're pretty good. And so here just we are going to look into how the NGRX state management using NGRX. So when it comes to state management, always state management is literally hard, right? So we want to maintain like whether the data is stale or not, like whether the data is fresh or not, and whether data is available when we are requiring, when we need it, and whether data is hydrated constantly. That's what stale. I was talking about stale, right? The whether data is hydrated accordingly. And one more important thing is whether the data is immutable or not, because you have the data should be immutable. And the other one would be like whether the data is particular data is shared or not. So there's a lot of features are depending upon when we go with state management purposes. So this NGRX, it provides you will answer all your questions for these kind of like basic principles. So you can just decide whether you need a state management tool libraries such as NGRX or not, like basically by answering these principles, like whether your application data tends to adhere to these principles. And those principles are whether your data is shared or not. Okay, whether data is shared or data is hydrated, whether it's refreshed constantly, whether data is available when you need it, when you go from one route to another route. When the data is retrieved, sometimes you need to depend on a particular data from an external sources, and so where data is available, so it goes and fetches the data from the external sources and gives it to you. And then whether your application is impacted or not, whether it's impacted by any external sources like UI changes, like your toggle button changes, and those kind of sort of stuff. So those kind of data, like if a collapse button, you have a drop down which is collapses and expands, and you want to state the change, because based on that you're going to have some API calls going on, some functions happening. So that's so even you have to manage those impacts also. So it's used to go to using NGRX is much more better. So I'm not here like saying like how to use a state management library. You can even have your own custom libraries also, but this NGRX, they are moving in a direction, and that direction is much more favored in the web framework, like, and it's much more much more much more capabilities are being provided through this NGRX also. Recently we got through NGRX component, we have the NGRX let and NGRX push directive, which automatically has the state manages your state and pushes your data into your particular components. And right now today even so that's work done by Michael Hadley. Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm saying the name wrong or something. Sorry for that. So that's the thing. So the next best practice would be like when you're working with legacy frameworks. Okay, so even though we had in a similar process with Angular 9 as a framework, coming to 9, and even with the Angular 10 version as being in the development, there will tend to be lots of legacy frameworks we tend to work with some companies. Like those certain things that we will be slow to move, migrate completely. So what they tend to bring is like they tend to bring in migrations, so little by little. So instead of migrating everything at a go, they just start with one particular features or modules, and then they keep on working on that, and then moving migration from them to the complete full application migration. So before we used to do with how we used to do with AngularJS and Angular migration in our applications would be like we develop separately the applications, the code base separately for the particular feature, and then what we do is we just create the build dist files, and we just inject the dist files into your through the script tags into your JSP pages or something which is legacy. We tend to do that in that way. But after post 4 or 5 releases, we got something called Angular elements. Okay, so this Angular elements are something. This web components was even available before, but it was not adapted by all the browsers. So rendering it in all the browsers was kind of like impossible, and with like Internet Explorer, it was really hard to render and web component. So it was still a dream for lots of framework developers to get something native, relatively native to that of an HTML elements. So that's when after a few years now, we have got this Angular elements, which kind of emulate the web component behavior. So now we can just create the Angular elements, and we can just render it to this file, and then we can just use them as a native HTML element into it, and your Angular view loads into that in your entire legacy applications. Also, when you try to load these Angular elements like this file, so you can just try to load like lazily also, so that when your node element is getting rendered, you can also try to load your script tag using lazy load or something, using the script tag function called load lazy. I think that's what function that property is. So we can also use that one also to load. So the next one would be like you always use the state injection strategy .on push for your presentation components, for your components. Now we are going to talk about this particular thing. always use them in a presentation components. Why I specifically mention this presentation component is because I'm just going to talk about this in the next slide. So I'm just saying like always use them in the presentation component because the change detection strategy on push it's increases your performance in application by a lot. Okay, in terms of compiling, in terms of Angular framework, not yeah. So that's that. So what this particular change direction strategy does on push does is it runs change direction only when it is needed. So when there's a change in the input or change in your output or change in your data, that's when you call the explicit market change direction, then only it runs this change direction. Until then it won't run. So that so as you know, like Angular has its change direction happening again and again. So that's how it calls and this one. So it increases performance like we saw. And one more. So before going into like, I'll try to like check whether if you guys have any doubts or not. So
Okay.
Okay.
I will add
okay,
to the. I just added myself to the stream. Yeah. So.
Yeah, just before.
Yeah, go ahead, Gugan.
Going on to next kind of like the next set, I think we have four more tips to provide it. So
yeah,
I just thought whether I got anything. So yeah, I'll just continue with the presentation. Yeah. So I'll just wrap it up quickly. I try to go with, I think at the time I'm nearing the time. Okay. So this component architectural style is kind of like what we have, like behavior components versus presentation components. You use your complex stateful logic for your behavior components, and this is presentation components. Like this role of presentation components is only to provide an user interface for the application. So that's how it works. So this is how you have your container here. This is kind of like a diagram which emulates the responsible like the difference between behavior and the presentation. So we have your container over here, which has we have two presentation components, P1 and P2. And if you want to pass the data to your presentation component, you pass it via input. If you want to and if you have any change, and from your presentation components, you show it the DOM, like we show it the view, like what will be rendered in case of this particular input this particular presentation component shows. And if any events are happening, like mostly are happening on DOM, and if they want to be and they are listened to via in your propagation output, and those components propagated to your parent component via at output, and they are handled it in your container. Okay, so the tip. The best practice over here is always try to pass the data as an observable to your child components. So that's the thing I want to say. Here the green blocks are container, there's my presentation behavior components, and my orange blocks are my presentation components. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is, like from your data load, from your data like observable, pass them into your. Instead of subscribing it in your container components, you can just pass them as an observable to your child components, okay? And subscribe them only at the last child component in the hierarchy, okay? So from here, if you're passing the data to my data, like first presentation component, and my presentation component has two components, you can subscribe to this particular data only in this particular component. Like if you want to, because since we have lots of complex stateful logic that are happening only in the container component, you need to pass the data down to your last child component. From the last child component, any events are performed, they have to be handled in your complex stateful logic. So that's this procedure. So what kind of like best thing, what kind of like what this kind of this tip provides us would be like, you don't have to worry about chain detection, calling the chain detection again. If you are subscribed into your first step, then you have to propagate passing the data down to, like, you have to either wait till your Angular calls your chain detection, or you have to wait, you have to call your functions, your ng on changes, so that it detects those changes. When the change is getting detected, then your functions still run. So the concept thing. So when we give this chain detection on push, we might also need to work with, like we need to check whether this particular data has been called, or we have to mark that particular data to be detected for changes. So this concept also happens in this picture. So that's why this is this particular tip provides us. So the caveat would be like when you're using HTTP observables, always try to include share replay, because if you see over here, if you're just passing an observable and if you don't want anything to subscribe at this one at subscribe at the end, you might go into a mode called as multiple subscriptions being happening. Okay, so you wanted to avoid that. So 2 times HTTP calls will be called. So you just want to avoid that. So I would suggest is whenever there's an HTTP call happening in your application, in your container, in your behavior components, just subscribe to them, subscribe to them or execute them in your model, in your component, and then emit the data via behavior subjects or that. So that will be much more easier, because you can do not worry about your unsubscription of that, because always the subscription of the HTTP observables will always be completed once a response is received. You don't have to worry about the unsubscribing explicitly. Okay, you don't even have to call any unsubscribing operators such as takeoff one or first off or something like that. It always completes once your data. So you just this is much more better. Okay, so the next one would be like will I be able to manipulate my DOM directly? Yes, you can manipulate your DOM. Okay, you can manipulate DOM, but you should try not to. The reason is because if you are trying to manipulate your DOM on your own, then you have to let Angular know that you are making changes to your DOM. So here you have to making changes to DOM. You might have to call mark for change, because else unless the next change detection runs in the component, the Angular will not know like any changes has been happened. So you have to mark that particular function or mark for change, so that Angular immediately, or you have to call change or detect changes, or so that it immediately runs a change detection once it calls that method. So how do you avoid that? You can go and avoid that using Angular wrappers for document to access the elements. So this is nothing but injecting this Angular document token. Okay, that's a TI token that represents the main rendering context of the Angular, and you can inject that into your application using this command. So so this particular thing at inject of document. So it now uses a private. So now we can use this particular document. So now it takes much more care about letting the Angular know like what it happens or what it does. Okay, so now we need to know like we need to let Angular know that this is the change detection that is happening. This is the time I'm making changes to my DOM. So there's one more method which automatically makes changes to your view, and also calls the change detection on its own, and that would be using your renderer class. So you can use renderer class for your custom UI changes, intercepting rendering calls, and listening to events. So here, once you get that element through the injection document API, then you can call the set attribute, and then you can call the listen to. This window render.listen is very much similar to what you use for window.add event listener. Okay, it takes 3 properties like element, click, and your event function. So these are the kind of 3 things. Okay, this is use enums for different state values. So if you have any people coming from the Java background, or other people might have an idea like enumerations or what they're going for, but these enumerations are new for JavaScript world because they come with TypeScript. So the thing is, if you have, instead of having them as constant values, you can just have them as constant enums. Okay, so that gives you much more types. In case if you want to provide them in switch case or the values, or in the switch cases ngIf to check that, and if you want to have a type based on a data, you know, like for example, you have something called brands, like shoe brands like Adidas, Nike, and Puma, and you know like these are 3 brands that you'll be working on. So you need to, like, you can just pass in the values as an enumerate, so then you can check on that particular data. So it gives you much more strict type strictness through this enums. Okay. And this is one more thing which would not have come across unless you are working with a migration of AngularJS to Angular applications. When you're working with migration from AngularJS to Angular applications, you tend to downgrade your Angular services so that it can be used in your AngularJS modules also, AngularJS services also. So what you have to do is, when you're downgrading these services, you have to explicit when your particular Angular service, that's the Angular latest version service, is going to be downgraded, you have to explicitly provide them in ng modules providers array. You might be wondering like what this is new with it, but what I'm trying to say is this part will not work when you're trying to downgrade an injected service. That is, any tree shakeable provider services that you have created, that is with the provider in syntax root, in your colon root, you give it in your service. Here, tree shakeable providers means like the services instances will be created only if it is used, and then it will be injected. If it is not used, then it will be removed from the bundling part. Okay, that's the beauty of the tree shakeable. Okay, so this one will not be available, so it will throw an error even though the instance is created. Even though we are using that instance in our Angular also, it will not be an instance will not be found in, it will throw error in your Angular JS build. So you have to explicitly provide that in ng provider modules providers array, and you have to remove the provider and syntax, and then only it's possible for us to downgrade the services using a downgrade injectable function from your upgrade module stuff. Okay, static functionalities. Okay, finally, I will just talk about this little bit of folder structure. We had a lot of folder structure talks regarding like in Portos, Angular for enterprise. I'm just going to explain this my view on enterprise folder structure that we are following in our, and which is much more helpful for us. Would be like this is a folder structure. So here I have like config folder. So this is where configuration related files can be for that particular module. So always assume that this is like this folder structures for this particular module. This can be the same concept if you want to go. This can be the same thing applied for. It can be a shared module. You are going to be kind of core module of anything for this kind of same thing would be this kind of same concept could be applied to. Okay, so this config directory could be like configuration related files, like whatever we saw on the first tip, what configurations to be injected and what configurations to be isolated for this particular scope. We can do that over here. Okay, and apart from that, it can be either a directory or it could be either some file like layout.config.ts, just for readability purposes. So the reason why we emphasize even on folder structures, even the folder structure is very important for building an enterprise applications. Okay, it has like you can't have everything in one particular folder, and the developer who was creating that at that time will know, okay, this is okay, I have it's understandable for me. But even that developer, after he comes back around after 1 year or something, he might be having hard times understanding like, why did I do this? Why did I write like this? So the enlightenment questions or realization questions will come into the picture of that part. So that's the reason that's the reason we even emphasize on the folder structure a lot. Okay, so that's the folder container. Okay, sorry, I'm just for configs. The next one would be like, I do not, even though we emphasis on the concept of the behavior versus presentation, that is your presentation components and behavior components to be separately available, I believe like we could put them in either in submodules or subfolders. For example, a layout can contain a header related components, a footer related components, and your some navy and some floating components, something like that. So what I suggest is for you guys to have it like feature wise folder grouping. Okay, so that, and having like for each folder group or sub could be a submodule, or even it could be your folder groups, and you can have in that particular folder you can have like behavior versus presentation components, and the behavior components will be always appended by a container name. Okay, if you just like have it like a container name attached to it. So and the other behavior presentation components can be like normal components. So when creating even a README file, okay, it's much easier to okay, this is where all the logic goes. Look for the component which has container, that's where all your logic goes. Yeah, that's it, fine. Then what about the features? Which features I'm going to use? Okay, related literal name to say footer, like it could be like in footer related stuff. It could be in header, it could be related to header related stuff. So those kind of stuff. So that's the only part I would like to explain. The other would be like for NGRX related stuff, you can have it in store. And one more thing would be like this $model.ts file. You could have all your types and enums data stuff going into that particular model. Okay, so that's the thing. Other things I believe are the straightforward. Okay, so finally at the end I would like to talk about this NX Dev Tools. Okay, if you have missed about this NX Dev Tools, please go and watch it. Again, the one of the Angular, I've talked a lot of talks regarding in Narwhal extensions also. It's a beautiful package. Okay, yeah, they provide lots of dev tools related configurations for mono repos. wherein you get all your codes are in one place, and you even get your ownership. The responsibility is created for each an individual folders can be created. Also, you can share your libraries across multiple applications. Also, now it's more than modules. Now you're going to share it across multiple applications. Also, that's also being provided. And out of box integration with unit testing frameworks such as Cypress, Just and Jasmine. Okay, you can just import their plugin integrations, and you can just start writing and they will create you. They create your configuration files for you, and that's much more easier than for us to look into like specific configurations, like how to integrate with Cypress, Just and Jasmine. All these three different frameworks README documentations kind of like couple everything into this custom schematics over here. Okay, now that comes into my next point would be like their custom schematics. They have a huge custom schematics base, and they are leveraging the Angular CLA framework for building custom schematics on the part, and that's also much more. They also give you opportunity they also give you build tools for you to create custom schematics for your particular applications, and just provide it to the NX, and the NX will take assume that you are running it from CLI. That's also is possible. Okay, and recently they introduced something called a distributed caching. Okay, with intelligible system, that particular parts of your thing with which app to build. If you have multiple apps, multiple monorepos, which you want to build, like if you have versioning systems, so if you have different applications in your same monorepo, you need to handle your versioning system. So that's all intelligently handled by them, and they distributed caching for all the applications with the different versionings. Even if you want for different applications, if you have different versions, it's also being provided also. So that's the way they bring it. So I believe that's it. So thank you. So I took some extra 10 minutes. I'm sorry. So I hope you guys.
Yeah, no problem, Gugan. So that was an interesting talk. So hope you are able to hear me.
Yes. Yeah. Hi, Uday. Yeah. I'm able to hear.
Okay. So yeah, we will go through the questions what participants posted.
Yeah, sure.
So I asked the participants like which best practice they liked most out of your discussion. I mean, this was like a couple minutes back.
Oh, sure.
And this was the response from Vishnu, handling the forms, the reactive and template-driven form, what you were talking about. And the other one is control value accessor concept with the basic info component. This is the another tip they liked most, it seems. And this is I just wanted to add something here. So you were talking about the legacy stuffs, right? How to migrate the legacy stuffs to Angular. Yeah, yes. We faced hardships last year when we migrate Java server faces application into Angular. And we did it by feature by feature, and we were able to achieve the target, as you mentioned. Yeah, as a whole, we cannot migrate it. Just one thing. Yeah. And this is a question, I believe, from Marcus.
Okay. So I would like to answer this. Okay. We are just passing the observable, and we are going to use async pipe, but we are going to do that subscription only at the last child component. So here there was suggested like when using NGRX, I recommend not passing data through too many levels. Yeah. Ideally, I believe like even when we code a concept of NGRX, or for that matter, we tend to kind of like retrieve the data, use the selectors, and retrieve the data only at our container components, and we tend to pass the data. We tend to manipulate the data. Sometimes, I was a little bit vague on the topic, but because if I talk more on that, it might take some time. So I'll just explain that right now. So the thing is like when you are using NGRX, like when NGRX data, the reason why is you can call your select also, like you can call your select even in your presentation components also, because you are not going to call any data. You can just fetching the data, so you can have your own selectors happening that you can just call your data even in your presentation components. You can dispatch your actions from your container. Okay, so from your container components presentation behavior, that stateful logic will be like triggering a state change. so that there's no sense of passing it via at the input. You can just have it in your local components, in local component. You can just fetch them from that. Then you can also use that also. So and yeah, data through many levels. I don't see any hardships regarding that. But if he gets more more questions to answer on that, I'd be much more happy to help answer on that part also. Yeah.
Okay.
Marcus, thank you for
you.
the question. That was a very good question. Yeah.
So this is the other one.
Yeah.
I think
so.
document.
Yeah. Yes. So this is the thing. Yeah. So we even faced that when we try to write unit test cases, we were not able to mock all your native APIs. So this is also a very good example, like why we need to use the documents DI token. Yeah.
And here is the last question.
How can we maintain or exchange multiple data subscription values, and how to identify each of them? Okay. I'm just not getting the question. Like, okay, how can we maintain and exchange multiple data subscription values? So is this question about like handling multiple data subscription, or if you want to subscribe to multiple data, subscribe to data multiple times? Because I would like to suggest that do not subscribe to data multiple. If you want to subscribe to multiple data multiple times, just make sure it's not an expensive operations. Okay, like when we talked about HTTP observable, like that's an expensive operation. Do not ever subscribe to it multiple times. Okay, you have to. That's the reason when I was explaining, you have to subscribe it once, then emit the data through an observable, and then we can use it. So in your application, so yeah, handling multiple subscriptions. The one thing what I think even answer asked me on sub question also. Yeah, Pawan. Hi, okay, Pawan. Hi, Pawan. So for handling multiple subscriptions, okay, if your data is not going to change, means you can go to a process called multicasting. Okay, we can use multicasting to it, so that you can have one of the four operators such as share or share replay or publish or publish last. Any one of those four operators is enough. Okay, if you use that, what happens is it will emulate a behavior of multiple subscriptions, but in turn, like it will be subscribed once, and all the other values will be shared among the multiple subscribers. So you can use that one. About identifying them uniquely, I am not sure like whether you'll be able to do that, because observable, as you know, observable is like a stream of data. You get a new value being pushed into it, then if a new value is pushed into it, you're gonna get that particular value. I'm not sure why to identify them uniquely, because if you get a new data, if I get a new data, you can just act on it. If you want to identify something in the data, you can just have a filter on top of it, or the receiving end, and you can just identify them like whatever you want to identify, with whatever conditions you want to identify, that you can do that. Yeah. So I hope I answered the question, Pawan. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Gugan. Can you share your slides URL with me? Yeah, I can tweet it, or I will put it as a live comment, or even you can do it now.
Yeah, sure. Just give me a minute.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, and it was very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And let me share my screen, and let's move on to the next. Yes, Gugan. Yeah. Let's move on to the next part, which is wrapping up. I hope you are able to see my screen, right? Okay, so thanks for joining all participants. Hope the session was useful to you. And as I already told you, this session is going to connect anyone and everyone from different part of the world. And we want to pull all the speakers who are interested to share their knowledge with the audience. And also we want to connect with them with the audience, basically, like end users. So that's why I started this group, and this group will be online forever. And just in case if you want to take part in this in future, like as a speaker, or if you have any questions related to the event, you can touch base with me on Twitter. You can connect with me on Twitter at AskUday handle, and you can post the questions over there. And May month event is already scheduled. You can check it out in the meetup group. I will also share this link in live comments. Please RSVP now so that you will not miss the event. And we have three speakers lined up. First speaker is from Ben from Australia. He is going to talk about token walks into a SPA. Okay, interesting title. And the second speaker is Alexander. He's from Ukraine. He's going to talk about RxJs, unit testing, and Angular application. He also has Udemy course. You can check that. And the third talk, it's already finalized. It's going to be Maniraj, but we haven't come up with a title yet. So I will update that here in a couple days once after everything is finalized. So this is the talk. These are the talks we have for May month event. It will be interesting again, like the one we had today. And do you have any suggestion or feedback to take the session to another level? You can just live comment it now so that I can read it, or I can take it up offline. So do you have any suggestion or any improvements you want to do here? And how was the session overall? Yep, sure. I will share the slides. I already got links from Nishu and Gugan. I will share it. And before we leave, I just want to thank our speakers as well. I will add them into the stream. I added Nishu and Gugan as well. And thank you so much, Gugan and Nishu, for taking your time and sharing your knowledge with us. I think Nishu is there, but her cam is not connected. That's fine. Yeah, so we hope for another session in future, maybe a couple months later. So once they come up with a different topic, or if they want to share something updated with the same title, you are welcome to share with the audience. And thanks, everyone. And thanks, audience, as well, for taking your time. We took some extra time here, like 20 minutes extra, but that was productive, I believe.
Yeah, I apologize for that. Sorry.
No problem.
It went more time.
Yeah, you had so many best practices on your slides. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Nishu.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Nishu.
Yeah.
Bye, Uday.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Gugan. Bye, Uday.
Yeah. Bye, Nishu. Bye, Gugan. Bye, everyone.